promise was made the prophets of old. From David's throne a Savior foretold. The Word became flesh, God's only Son. Light of the world, the righteous one.
So what I figured we'd do, because we kind of have rounded out the whole science portion of our exploration of the evidence of does God exist. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of do a quick recap, because we've been gone a few weeks. So just do a recap, a little review of the scientific things we talked about, and then kind of lay it out and prepare the foundation to talk about kind of the more philosophical evidence of the existence of God. So we're going to do a little recap of the evidence so far. We have had three kinds of evidence that we've looked at. We had the beginning of the universe, the origin of life, and the origin of DNA, the information found in DNA. Remember, it's like the fact that there's a universe at all is one of the bits of evidence that we will look at. And then what we're going to do after that is look at morality, what's called the moral argument for the existence of God. The fact that we have objective morality points to that you would have someone to give that morality. If you have a moral law, you need a lawgiver. And so we'll get to that, start to lay the foundation for that here in a little bit. Just a reminder, kind of the way we're arguing, the way we're examining it, is we say, okay, we have this thing. What is the best explanation for that thing? And so we have our effects, like the beginning of the universe. What's the best explanation for the beginning of the universe, for instance? And so let's take a look at that one, kind of refresh what we talked about. Kind of the argument, the way it's framed up, is that anything that begins to exist has to have a cause. Right? If something happens, there has to be something that caused it. And if the universe began to exist, therefore it must have a cause that's outside of itself. Right? The universe can't cause itself to exist, because it didn't exist in the first place to do anything. And so that's the argument we were looking at. And remember, we talked a little bit about Einstein. Everybody knows Einstein, smart guy. At the time, no one thought the universe did begin to exist. Scientists pretty much thought that the universe was just eternal and had always been. And Einstein, in his theory of relativity, kind of came across some things that were pointing out that there might have been a beginning, that the universe seemed to have been expanding according to his equations. He didn't like that, so he kind of fudged the numbers to fix it to what he thought it should have been. But then you have this guy, Edwin Hubble. Right, we know that the Hubble Space Telescope, it's floating around up there, we take the pictures. Well, he, back in the 30s, he was looking up in the sky and he saw all these galaxies. Right, we finally started getting these big mountaintop observatories, and he's looking through these giant telescopes, and he sees these little pinpricks of light. They're not stars, they're galaxies. And as he's studying them, he notices that their light seems to be shifted towards the red end of the spectrum. And the reason that's important is because of the way, what's called the Doppler Effect. With sound, it's like whenever the car, if you've ever been to a race or stood by the side of a road, as the cars get closer to you, the pitch gets higher and higher and higher, and then as they pass by, then it gets lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. That's the Doppler effect, because the sound waves, as it's coming towards you, the sound waves are getting compressed. That makes a higher frequency, and then as it goes away, the wavelengths are getting stretched out, and that makes a lower frequency. Well, light does the same thing, because light is waves. However, the high pitch frequency to light is blue, and the low wave, wide wavelength of light is red. So he's looking up and he's seeing everything shifted to the red. And so that means it's moving away. And if it's moving away, that means that there's expansion going on. Now, just to remember that the universe isn't like this great big empty place and all the stars are just moving through space. What he's witnessing is the universe itself is expanding. So it's like if you picture it as like a big sheet of spandex. and all the universes are, on the spandex, and you're just stretching the spandex. That's what's going on with the universe. And so he's figuring all this out. Well, Einstein comes on over and has a visit with Hubble and looks through his telescope, and Einstein says, I now see the necessity of a beginning. So here you got one of the smart, his name is synonymous with smart. If you want to call someone smart, you call them Einstein, right? And Einstein looks and says, hey, there was a beginning. The universe began to exist. And then we looked at Stephen Hawking. He's the physicist that's in a wheelchair. He's a miracle in himself. He should not have survived to adulthood with the condition he has. He's in a wheelchair that he has the motor around in. He can't talk. He types it in his little voice synthesizer. Easy for me to say. Well, he's also a brilliant physicist. And he continued where Einstein kind of left off when he figured out that space is curved. And if you take something that's curved and you shrink it down and down and down and down as it contracts back, you get to a 0 point where it curves in on itself and there is no space at all, which would be a beginning. So where would you have anything? It gets back to a 0 point beginning, and he figured that out. And so what we see from these evidences is that whatever caused the universe has to be outside of the universe. Right? Because if the universe doesn't exist, there can't be something in it to cause it. Right? That seems pretty obvious. Whatever it is, it has to be spaceless. Space doesn't exist. So where is this thing at? It doesn't take up any space. It's spaceless. Also has to be timeless, because space and time kind of work together. Physicists have kind of figured out how this weird time thing works. Gravity affects time. Time is not just some set flowing thing. It's kind of interesting when you get into it. It's like, did you know that clocks at sea level, you can take it 2 clocks, set them exact time, put one at sea level, put one up on a mountain, and then after a while come back and compare them and their times will be different. The satellites that are in GPS, that are in orbit, that control our GPS, if you want to know where you're going, those actually have a computer program in them that adjusts for the time difference, because the closer you are to gravity, the slower your time gets. And so time actually functions as a part of the universe. So if there's no universe, there's no time. So whatever created the universe has to be timeless. Also has to be immaterial. If you have no universe, you have no matter, because you know where to put it. All right? And it has to be powerful. If it's going to create something out of nothing, it has to be immensely powerful, and it has to be intelligent, rational. Whatever this cause is, it had to choose to cause. Well, now let's see. Outside the universe, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, and intelligent. Does that sound like anyone you know? We typically refer to him as God. So as we look at our evidence of the universe, the fact there is a universe, we have theism and naturalism. There were a couple others we talked about. They're not really in the running much. The major ones in our world, in our culture, is atheism or naturalism, and theism. And so naturalism, saying that the universe is the only thing that exists. That's what naturalism says. Well, if the universe is the only thing that there is, then there can't be something outside of the universe to cause it. So naturalism has no explanation for the beginning of the universe. However, theism, God created the universe. That explanation fits the evidence that there is an all-powerful, intelligent, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, intelligent, personal creator. Fits the evidence. Okay? Any questions or comments about the beginning of the universe thing? No, we've already covered all this. This is all just review, but if there's anything that kind of jumps out, feel free to throw your hand up and flag me down. Okay, so the beginning of the universe, then we have the origin of life. So we, according to the secularists, according to atheist naturalistic ideas, that there was once the earth was nothing but inorganic rock and all that kind of stuff, and then life, organic life, arose. We talked about how that might happen, and so they said, well, no problem, because back then they thought that the earliest, simplest, most basic form of life, the single-cell life form, had nothing really to it. They actually thought that it was just a simple, homogeneous globule of plasma, like a little piece of jelly, just some little chemical things going on there. But then they started discovering more and more that it actually had these other parts and pieces and this nucleus and the DNA, and they started discovering all these intricate details about the cell. If you remember, we looked at this guy. That's actually a little rotary engine type thing going on. It's a power plant is what that is. That's actually a turbine generator operating in your cells right now. It is charging. You see these little things that come in, the little blue ones come in and they shoot out purple. That's basically the battery packs that run our cells. They get depleted, they find their way back there, this recharges them, off they go to do their job. And so that is operating in the cell. That's not really a basic, simple little piece of machinery. That's quite complex. One of the things that would power, we showed, was this guy. He carries things in your cells. There's those little microtubule things that he's walking on that crisscross across your cells like highways, and he just trucks back and forth carrying stuff. And so we see these things going on. And that guy is what's called a protein. We looked at proteins. Proteins serve functions. Proteins are a special kind of molecule that do things in our cells. And proteins are made up of amino acids, which is a molecule, and then the way those go together actually shapes the protein, right? And so the shape determines the function it serves. The chains of these amino acids determines the shape it takes, and the sequence determines the shape, that way it's going to fold and the way it's going to shape out. And so if we're going to figure out, okay, how did this happen? We have to figure out, how did these amino acids come together? What are the chances of what we need to explain to show that these were able to come together? And we worked out the numbers, if you'll remember, and we came out to the probability, the chances of one of these coming together is extremely rare. 1 out of 10 to the 74th. That is 1 with 74 zeros behind it. We don't even have a name for that number. It's so large. It's just this massive number. There's a 1 in that chance. But then we looked at how it's even worse than that, because these amino acids come in 2 types. Mirror image, left-handed, right-handed. And only one of them actually functions to form proteins. I forget if it's the left or the right, but you have to have the specific one or it doesn't work. So that's another 1 in 2 chance. Okay, so you have the chance that you're going to get the right sequence, and then you can have the chance that you're going to have the right shape, right, left hand or right hand, and then you need some glue to hold it all together. And that's what's called a peptide bond. This is your Gorilla Glue. They really only come in 2 kinds of options. You have your Elmer's glue and your Gorilla Glue. We want the Gorilla Glue. That's the peptide bond. It's going to hold it together good. So that's another 1 out of 2 chance, which comes out to 10 to the 45, which is a 1 with 45 zeros. So we take these 3 things and put them together. What are the chances you're going to get your amino acids and the little building blocks in just exactly the right order? 10 to the 74th. What are the chances you're going to get them in the right shape? 10 to the 45th. What are the chances you're going to have the right kind of bond to hold them together? 10 to the 45th. And all of that equals 1 out of 10 to the 164. Just to give you an idea of that number, that's how big that number is. 1 out of that much. That's the chance of it occurring completely randomly by natural processes bringing that together. And that's for 1 protein. Just 1. The average cell has between 250 and 400, which means in order for a cell to come together to form out of natural processes, that astronomical figure has to happen 250 times. And so we compare, again, our evidence that life came about, that we have this origin of life. Does naturalism have any kind of option to do that? Because there's no intelligence, there's nothing guiding it, it's pure chance. Does that really sound like a feasible explanation? No, it doesn't. Well, how about theism? How about God? How about that there's an intelligent, powerful creator that builds it and puts it together? Well, that actually explains the evidence. That's what we see going on. And then we talked about our design in DNA. And this is actually my favorite. This is one of those things that just kind of like a nail in the coffin of naturalism, of atheism, I think. We have our DNA. There's a little artist representation of the DNA. And you see those little letters in there, the G-A-C-T. Those are basically like an alphabet. Our DNA functions like a computer code. And that is the little alphabet code lining out what our DNA is to do. When it builds our cells, when it repairs things, whenever it creates these proteins, that the arrangement of those letters in that molecule tells it what to do. The information in DNA directs the building of our proteins. So how does it know to build this guy? Your DNA tells it to. That the information in our cell to build these amazing things are in the DNA, written into it like a computer code. And that's actually what it's referred to. Richard Dawkins, who is no friend to Christianity, no friend to religion. He's quite anti-religion, quite hostile and militantly anti-religion. And even he says that the machine code of our genes is uncannily computer-like. And apart from the differences in jargon, the pages of a molecular biology journal might be changed with those of a computer engineering journal. I didn't have the exact quote on a slide, but Bill Gates, Mr. Microsoft, has said something along the lines that the information found in our DNA and our genetics is like a computer software code, but only more sophisticated than anything we've ever written. And that's in our genes. Now, just to show you how unlikely this is, let's say, anyone ever have Alphabet's cereal? I don't know, probably not have any of it lately, but you know, Alphabet cereal. Let's say you have some Alphabet cereal in the cabinet, and you come down into the kitchen one morning, and this is what you see. A box of cereal dumped over, and it says there, "Have a nice day." Are you going to stop and go, "Wow, what are the chances? That's going to spill out and is going to spell something. That is amazing," right? You're not going to think that. You walk out and you see that, what are you going to think? You're going to think, who did that? Who did that? And you'd be right, because we know intuitively that information is only the product of an intelligent activity. Only intelligence produces information. There is no other known cause of information except intelligence. So that's what we have. In our cells, in our DNA, we have information. We have a biological computer code written in our genes. Can naturalism explain that? No, because there's no intelligence. Where do you get the information without intelligence? But theism, we have an explanation for that. God is actually a far better explanation of how information got into our genes. And so as we compare what could possibly have caused this, we have that God did it, and that makes the best explanation. And so there's far more evidence out there that when you add it up, it just goes, God, it has to be God. God is the best explanation for any of this. And I'm just going to scratch my head about why would anyone sit there and just say that, no, there is no God. Well, I'm looking, and everything I see says that there is. Okay. So that's going to bring us to what's going to be our new kind of thing that we're going to talk about for the next couple of weeks. The moral argument. That is to say that an argument from morality, because we all know morality exists. Here's the argument. This is how this basically gets formulated, how philosophers would state this. If God does not exist, moral values are not objective. Moral values are objective, therefore God exists. Okay? Now, what we're going to do today is just kind of lay out some defining of terms and get us kind of on the right page so that next week we can really discuss this a little bit better. Moral values. Now, we're talking about moral values. One thing that people kind of get a little confused on is the difference between values and duties. See, values have to do with if something is good or bad, whereas duties has to do with if something is right or wrong. And that might seem like the same thing right at first, right? If it's good, it's right. If it's bad, it's wrong. We use those interchangeably a lot of times. But really, good and bad, what that has to do with is just the value of something, whether a thing in and of itself is good or is bad. However, right and wrong has to do with obligations. It is the right thing to do. You should do it. So, for instance, being a doctor is good. Helping people, healing people, that's good. So does that mean you ought to go be a doctor? You have an obligation to go be a doctor because being a doctor is good. No? It's also good to be a firefighter. Self-sacrifice, risking yourself to help others, right? That's good. Does that mean you are obligated to go be a firefighter? No. No. So there's a question of what is good, but then there's the difference of also what is the right thing to do. Because there's also times whenever maybe you have nothing but bad choices, but you still have to make a choice. So what is the right thing to do when all you have are bad choices? So you can see how it's not exactly the same thing, good and bad. And so we are not talking about duties. We're talking about values, objective moral values. Because there's people who might agree on moral values that we can argue about what's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. An example, one that is often given is, let's say you're in Nazi Germany, and your Jewish friends from down the street are hiding in your attic. And the Nazis come knocking on your door, and they ask if you have seen your friend. Well, lying's bad. But giving up innocent people to be tortured and executed is also bad. And people may disagree. What is the right thing to do? There are some people who might hold honesty as so high a value that they would say, no, the right thing to do is just tell the truth and let it be in God's hands. But then there's people who would say, no, the right thing to do is to protect innocence. And so we might disagree on the duty, right? But we all would agree on the values. And so that's really where we're going to get at, is that objective values do exist. There are things that are actually right and they are actually wrong. Or they are actually good or they are actually bad. And that's what objective means. And understand what it means to be objective. First off, subjective, that's the opposite of objective, is dependent on human opinions. If something is subjective, it's an opinion. It came about because someone just thinks it's that way. Right? Whereas objective is independent of opinion. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. It is the way it is. So if you think about a tree, what are trees made of? Wood, right? What if someone says, no, trees are made of jello? They're what's called wrong, right? Because trees are made of wood. It's an objective fact. It doesn't matter what anybody's opinion is, trees are made of wood. Whereas subjective would be chocolate tastes good. Oh, does chocolate taste good? I think it tastes awesome. And I know people who disagree. Right? That is an opinion. Whether or not chocolate tastes good is based on the opinion of the person. It's not a trait of the thing itself. And so that's the difference between objective and subjective. Objective is true regardless of what anyone or everyone thinks. We would all agree that the Holocaust, Nazis just make such a great example of evil. The Holocaust was a horrible, horrible, evil, foul thing. Well, what if the Nazis had won? What if they had managed to kind of take over the world, and anyone who disagreed with them, they either killed or converted to their way of thinking, and now all of a sudden, the entire world thinks that the Holocaust was a wonderful, good thing. Was it really a wonderful, good thing? No. No. Because it is objectively true that the extermination of the Jews was a bad thing. And so that is where we're going to be going in the next few weeks, is explaining about morality and how this works, because there's people who say, no, There's no such thing as objective morality. It's just whatever you want to think. And we're going to look at some of those challenges, some of the other explanations people have besides God to say why we have objective values. But everyone agrees we have objective values. Even people who say that we have no objective moral values, as soon as they get wronged, they are very quick to say, no, that's wrong. Shouldn't do that. Well, what is that? That's an objective value claim. And so we all know it. Intuitively, we understand. Now, one thing I do want to say, just because I think it's fun. One of the biggest things that often gets pushed up against Christianity as a challenge is the existence of evil. That bad things happen in the world. Well, the problem is, if someone is going to claim the problem of evil, if someone is going to claim that there is evil in the world and that God should not allow that evil, then they're going to run themselves into a problem. Because if moral values are not objective, there can be no claim to the problem of evil, because if morality is subjective, if it's only a matter of opinion, all of morality is just an opinion, there is no such thing as what? Evil. People can't complain about evil if there's no such thing as evil. And if morality is just a matter of opinion, then there's no evil, there's no problem. So whenever people want to say, and I find this a lot of times, that someone will say, well, that is horrible because God allows this evil. That God can't exist because he can't be loving if he allows this evil. What evil? That evil. Oh, that objective evil. Well, if it's an objective evil, that means it's objective morality. It points to the existence of God. But we'll get into that in the weeks to come. As we'll see, and we'll talk about it again, no one is a consistent relativist. Relativism, relative morality is the idea that, you do whatever you want, I'll do whatever I want. You think it's wrong, I disagree, just whatever, it's all good. I'm not going to say you're wrong. You just do your thing, I'll do my thing, it's whatever. That's relativism. No one is a consistent relativist. Because as soon as they have evil done to them, all of a sudden they're going to find themselves being an objectivist. So that's where we're going to spend the next couple weeks. If God does not exist, moral values are not objective. Moral values are objective, therefore God exists.
While we were sinners, Christ died for us.